The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Our webinars are the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m., covering different topics in the planning and related fields. This week, we have the 2017 Legislative Update featuring APA Virginia Chapter's 2 lobbyists, Eldon James and Sue Rowland, and APA Virginia Chapter's Vice President of Legislative Affairs, Brandie Schaeffer. We want to thank the Berkeley Group for being a continuous supporter of our chapter and for recommitting for next year. They make these webinars possible, and they're free and open to anyone because of sponsors like them. The presenters will take all questions at the end. If you have them, please type them in the box. Once the webinar is completed, it will be posted to YouTube within 24 hours. Please mark your calendars for next month's webinar on August 28th, a primer on proffers with Thomas Skaczynski of Virginia Tech. I'm now going to hand it over to Sue, Eldon, and Brandie so they can get started.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction, and thanks for joining us for the webinar today. This is just a reminder that this webinar is based on what was presented at the Virginia APA conference in Roanoke, and so it's a recap of that for people who were not able to attend the session or not able to attend the conference. So if you were one of those people, you might not want to be on the call today. But let's go ahead and get started. As Sarah said, I'm Brandie Schaeffer. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Virginia chapter, the American Planning Association, and we're joined today by our wonderful on-staff lobbyists, Eldon and Sue. So Eldon and Sue, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Well, it's ladies first.
Everybody, hello, and really glad that you're joining us today. I'm Sue Rowland, and I am one of your two contract lobbyists. Let me say that I anyway, especially enjoy working with you guys. You do extraordinary work that has real impact on the lives of Virginians, not only in the short term, but in the long term. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eldon.
And I'm Eldon James, and I'm the other half of the lobbying contract lobbying team for APA Virginia, and I too am really glad to be part of this team. With that, Brandie, our time is short, and we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yes, we do. Let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to focus on today in this webinar is looking back on 2017 and what really mattered to us. As you know, the General Assembly moves really fast, and there is a lot going on when they're in session. And this was a 45-day session. And so what we kind of like to say, or something that's helped me to understand it, is if we think about the General Assembly and their different types of sessions and the amount of bills that they're reviewing, if we think of a regular school year when we've got semesters and deadlines and it kind of drones on and you're kind of waiting for it to end, the General Assembly sessions are kind of like summer school. It all happens really fast, it's moving really quick, and there's a lot going on. And so as a plug right now, I would like to say this is a really good opportunity to get involved in the legislative committee. You can see here from the number of resolutions and bills that Eldon and Sue are reviewing that we need as much help as we can get in hearing how these things might matter to you. Are they important? And what are those impacts? And so if you're not familiar with the legislative committee, we have calls every Friday and we focus on the top 10 bills. And if you've never heard of Eldon's top 10 bills, it's rarely top 10. We sometimes have 30 bills that we're trying to review and provide feedback for Eldon. And so it's really helpful if we can hear how this might affect your unique community or the impacts to you. So just as a way to get involved, we always are looking for help. Today, we will again focus on the top 10. I don't actually think it's 10. I haven't counted, but we like to call it that. And it's just a reminder of the things that we think that happened this session that are important to you. And we're going to save a little bit of time at the end and see if there's anything that we missed or bills that you tracked yourself or that you heard about from your local attorneys that might have been impactful that you would like to discuss with us as well. The first bill, as we kick this off, is House Bill 1697. And this is kind of the bill that is, while new, has droned on for forever. This was back, you'll remember, during the recession when everybody was kind of struggling. There was approvals, but there wasn't a market to build it. The developers and builders had gone to the General Assembly asking for extensions of those approvals. And at the time when Eldon was tracking this and watching this, we kind of joke that it's interesting how they were able to predict when we would come out of the recession. But this thing continues to come up every year with an extension, continuing to add time to those old stagnant zonings. And this is presenting problems for jurisdictions in the sense that we are seeing new regulations coming out of the General Assembly related to stormwater management and other things we're doing with transportation. But these old stagnant, stale zonings continue to be extended. One of the things that Eldon and Sue are really good at is striking a balance. And so when this bill first came forward, it was an extension of those residential subdivision plats and your site plans and special exceptions to 2021. We were looking for 2019, and so this is an extension till 2020. And so it will hopefully be the last time that we see these extensions. But with that in mind, we would love to hear some specific cases from you all, whether in an email or questions at the end, that would help us to understand how this might be impacting your community. So as we go into the 2018 session, Eldon has some case studies that he can specifically point to on that one. Next, I will turn it over to Eldon for House Bill 1774.
Thank you, Brandie. And you know, we just need to do stormwater every year. And this was this year's installment of stormwater. The major legislation of a couple of years ago that aimed to consolidate erosion and sediment control and stormwater was supposed to be implemented as of July 1 this year. And that bill was pretty comprehensive, did a lot of good things, but it didn't address what is known as the donut hole down in rural coastal Virginia. The areas of the state that aren't MS4 but are covered by the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. And this bill was aimed at pulling together another working group led by the Coastal Policy Center out of William and Mary Law to try to fix that problem. And in so doing, it also extended out that implementation of the more comprehensive bill a couple of years ago for another year. So those the main thing that affects folks statewide is that 1 year delay. Stay tuned. There'll be more legislation next year, hopefully coming out of this working group to try to deal with that issue that really mainly affects just the three planning districts, Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula, and Eastern Shore. Moving on from that, let's shift gears over to small cells. We had to fight kind of two bills. I know you see three bills listed here. The first one, Delegate Kathy Byron's Bill 2801, was aimed at severely limiting local authority to put facilities on the ground for broadband. And the other bill, which you see two bills listed, there was a House version and a Senate version, was aimed at streamlining the approval of wireless facilities, both the small cell, the so-called 5G, which nobody can really tell you exactly what it's going to look like, as well as the traditional large towers. Frankly, so much energy was put in fighting HB 2108 to preserve local authority, to have local broadband authorities, that the efforts to deal with the other bills were not quite as successful. HB 2108 was amended and effectively didn't do any harm. Now, that being said, I think Delegate Byron and the industry may be back on that issue next year, but we'll have to see on that. the delegates bill, Delegate Kilgore, HB 2196, was actually killed on the floor of the House, but the Senate bill, Senator McDougal's SB 1282, passed. In the course of negotiating that, all the large cell towers were removed from the bill, so the streamlining really only affects the small cell facilities. And Brandie's going to talk about that a little more in just a second. But in the course of working through that compromise late in the session, VACO and VML were forced to agree that there would be continuation of a working group that would then focus on the large cell facilities, and that's ongoing as we speak. And I expect to see some legislation there attempting to streamline that as we move into the 2018 session. Brandie?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot going on here with small cell, and it was a win for us to get those large towers out, but we still get back to this message, just kind of one size doesn't fit all, and what's good for one community might not be for another. And so we're always looking to retain some of that local control and that local oversight that allows us to look at each thing. And here's just an example out of Oakland, who had gone through this deregulation first. And what we're seeing here is a lot of times on the left side is what the small cell companies tell us that they want to do and what they show the elected officials is going to happen. And so when planners and town attorneys and county attorneys are looking at this, it doesn't seem like it's as impactful. But if you look on the right, there's always going to be a bad offender, and there's always going to be somebody who wants to do something different than what we anticipated. And that's why we need that ongoing local review. So this is just something to continue to watch and be aware of as we move forward. Eldon, on to the House Bill 1766.
Thank you, Brandie. The Delegate Habib, and there was a companion bill carried by Senator Stanley, both from Southwest Virginia, carried this bill, and in testimony they presented that this was really an economic development tool to make it easier for Appalachian Power projects to move quickly by really declaring that your associated facilities, such as substations, are included in that approval from the State Corporation Commission, and thereby don't, they're automatically deemed as satisfying local comp plan requirements, and so don't require a separate 2232 review. These are for the 138 kV lines, which are lines that are constructed by Appalachian. These are not Dominion does not install these types of lines, although there were quite a few folks during the session that were concerned this was a backdoor way for Dominion to try to do something. They insisted it was not their bill. The patrons insisted it was not Dominion's bill. And late in the process, too, there was an amendment put on to make it clear that this didn't apply to Prince William County, because of data centers and upgrades to Dominion power lines that are in process in Prince William. There was fear that there really was something more going on in the dark by Dominion, even though they insisted there was not. We will need to be paying attention in the future, because it wouldn't take much of a language change for this to apply to Dominion in the future. We did do some look at Appalachian's plans, and we found that there is one line down in the Bristol area. Brandie, if you can move to the next slide, that looks to be the only project that's on Dominion's planning and books that this would apply to at this time. Of course, it would apply to other future projects, but this is the only one that's in the works. With that, that moves us on to a different bill that we'll talk about. And you notice the word fail written on this slide. We usually tend to concentrate on the bills that passed, unless there's a bill that failed that we feel is a marker something that look for in the future. This was also one that I like to refer to as my Sesame Street moment because I learned how to pronounce photogrammetrists during the session. The bill brought forward on behalf of the land surveyors and photogrammetrists to require licensing. And the bill was written so broadly that for many state agencies and local governments, it would mean that their GIS technicians might get swept up and have to be licensed, even though they're not doing survey work in their jobs for local government. There was attempts made to work with the backers of the bill on language. They were not really very cooperative with trying to narrow the bill, and consequently, an all-out effort had to be put by those concerned to defeat the bill. There was a Senate version of this that was also defeated. I think the proponents will probably be back. They are concerned that if somebody is trying to go beyond with their GIS system and really trying to determine plats or those types of things, that they're really stepping into the land surveyors and the photogrammetrists trade, and they may have a point there, but there needs to be protection for the day-to-day work that goes on by GIS folks. And with that, I think I'm turning over to Sue at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in real quick here, Eldon. I think this was an opportunity you and I had discussed where it's a chance for the planning field to really reach out to some of our partners in what we do. And so if you have a chance to stop into your GIS offices, talk to them, ask them if they're aware of the bill and what some of their concerns might be. I had a chance to do that, and I did speak to a couple of GIS people, and their concern was some of the fiscal impacts of getting these certifications and something that might take a year. And a lot of times when we get submissions and, our zoning ordinance might say you have to submit a plat or a survey plan, and we've gotten to a point where we're just using kind of a GIS printout in certain cases. And so we hear what this bill is about and understanding it and protecting it, but I think there's a lot of complicating factors that really would be to our benefit to reach out to the fellow GIS technicians in your office and talk to them and see if we can be one step ahead of this bill if it comes back up, that we've kind of already forged some of those relationships and can reach out to them when it pops up again. Yes, the next one, we will turn over to Sue to talk to us about one of our favorite subjects, which is short-term rentals.
Short-term rental, which folks, we shorthand, of course, may reference from time to time Airbnb, the company that's kind of the leader in this field. But as you know, there are many other companies that do the same thing. There's a website called Skift, S-K-I-F-T. It's a group that is into tourism and monitoring what's happening with hotels and bed and breakfasts, and of course, short-term rentals. And in May of 2016, they did a nice little piece on the net worth of this new entity, short-term rentals. And they said net worth, not gross, net worth was about $100 billion worldwide. That's billion with a B. About 25% of that is in the United States, according to them. And they predicted that by 2019, just a short couple of years away, that net worth value is going to increase to 170 billion. Worldwide, every local and equivalent of our state government is working on how to balance, how to embrace both the wonderful new technologies and businesses that we benefit from, but also trying to respond to concerns and issues that arise on the ground, particularly with companies like this one. Vancouver, for example, just recently documented a decrease in the affordable housing stock in their city. And while we can't do anything like this in Virginia, it's not allowable under our Constitution. They've even instituted a tax on empty or unoccupied homes. Well, in Virginia, this starts in 2016 when the first bill was introduced by the industry. It was an attempt to usurp local government authorities in this area, particularly as it relates to land use and ordinance impositions on this industry. It was patroned by Delegate Peace, and the bill was one of two statewide bills that the industry had introduced across the country, again, in an effort to kind of get at or move forward from what they had previously been dealing with as a city-by-city ordinance to just saying statewide in Virginia, local governments are just not going to have authority over this type of industry. Well, similar to the bill Eldon just described on the Can I Do It photogrammetrists, local governments were instrumental in defeating this bill in 2016. It was very clear that the industry was not going to finish with that. What the General Assembly did, as it often does, is it punted this policy issue to one of its many commissions, and in this case, the Housing Commission. A specific study group was formed that was chaired by Delegate Peace with Senator Norment. You see his picture here, as well as Senator Stanley, Senator Barker from Northern Virginia, Delegate Boulevard from Northern Virginia. Most of these folks also have seats on the Housing Commission, but they were charged with getting the two main parties together, local government and the short-term rental industry, and see what could get worked out. The group consisted of many other interested parties. Bed and breakfast folks were represented, hotels were represented, tax people, insurance people. They got really a wide range of presentations from groups and lots of public comment, particularly from Northern Virginia and the Hampton Roads area, specifically Williamsburg, which of course is an area that Senator Norment also represents. Lots of input from folks that not only use the short-term rentals, they themselves provide short-term rental opportunities, but also from the folks who live near the homes and apartments or condos that have been offered up. Lots and lots of complaints and stories about bad actors. And you may even recall that recently in Virginia Beach, a murder took place when somebody had rented through one of these facilities. So anyway, as the summer goes on, it became pretty clear that there was not going to be any consensus. The Housing Commission stuck to its guns, and even at its formal meeting in which it heard what the two sides, if you will, were presenting, took a shot at, again, trying to find some consensus. About the only thing that they all could agree on was that there needed to be statewide legislation. So off we all went to 2017. And two senators in particular, Senator Stanley, but also, of course, Senator Norment, took hold of this legislation, put a bill in SB 1578. They also, and Senator Norment even put language in the budget to make it quite clear to the industry, this is the best you're going to get. So be happy with what you have. Let's not have any backroom shenanigans going on, and let's move forward from here and see how it works. Bottom line, it was a win for local government. VML in their newsletter post-session said it quite clearly, and what is allowed under state law now as a result of Senate Bill 1578 is that localities by ordinance can require registration of short-term rental offerers. They can charge a reasonable fee. They can impose a financial penalty if somebody fails to register. there are details about collection of taxes and so forth. But let me say that in preparation for this, I did my own short-term rental search. Richmond City has an ordinance that outlaws these opportunities, and I had no trouble finding places that were available to me in Richmond City. Arlington recently just instituted a new ordinance, came into effect just on July the 1st. At this point right now, they're feeling like it's going quite well. But the bottom line is there will be in 2018 the return of Airbnb. We will be looking for pushback from the industry, and a lot of what they're going to be evaluating is how well local government has moved forward in responding to this authority that has been provided. What ordinances have been put in place? What have the ordinances said? And then what results have we heard from that? Brandie, anything you want to add to that?
No, I just really appreciate you making that point, because I think it is really important for the planners and, just our industry in general to understand that when we do have a win in Richmond, we really need to act on it. We need to show that, all of these efforts that we've put in and them preserving our power is something that we are going to continue to act on and put in place. So as we move forward into 2018 and you're looking at amendments to your zoning ordinance and things that you need to do, these are ones that, as Sue said and Eldon has talked about, we really encourage you to act on some of these things and put things in place and share that with us. So Eldon has that when he's talking, and Sue can talk about how you've made these changes and you appreciate the preserving of that ability to regulate this use type. So I just think that's a good point on this bill, especially as we start to talk about Senate Bill 1491. And this, again, was one that didn't pass. It failed. But Sue, the point on this one kind of follows up from the Normant bill and saying, where could it go if we don't act? So if you want to cover a little bit about this one and how it came about, that'd be helpful.
Well, this really, this is Eldon, and the bill was requested by a constituent of the senator who has a single-family home that he wanted to be able to rent out so that people could come and spend a week on the farm. And I think our kind of reaction was, okay, so maybe we could in the future look to change the agritourism statute to we could shorten it tremendously by what is not allowed as agritourism, because these constant attempts to define agritourism, to me, that's a residential use. That's now agritourism. So the bill was defeated. And are we going to see it back? I don't know, but I think there will always be certain attempts to expand that use and what's covered under.
Okay, thank you for that thorough explanation on how that played out this year. And I agree, just concluding it was a real win. These next set of bills we're calling the Wagner Bills deal with a variety of things, but none of them are overly important or burdensome in either way, but they're things that kind of start to show what we might see in the future. I think it's a direction, it's discussion on renewable energy and solar power that we've been wanting to have for a long time. So I think that it's at least a starting point. Some of these have some minor procedural things in them or some minor adjustments, but I do believe there's a couple of things that you wanted to contribute, Eldon, that you felt were good takeaways with these Wagner bills.
Well, I think you've covered the gist of it. 1395 kind of streamlined, making it a permit by rule for the small renewable energy projects. 1394 dealt with the small agricultural generators, and then 1393 directs the two big investor-owned power companies, Dominion and Appalachian, to conduct a community solar pilot program for retail customers, which sounds good, but when you look at what the change is to the law, the rules for establishing the pilot are so complex that I find myself questioning whether we're actually going to see somebody stand a pilot up. And it may be, stay tuned, more legislation to come to make that happen. I think, moving on, like you've done to the next slide, solar power, it is an issue that, on the one hand, it's important from a renewable energy standpoint, from, clean energy standpoint, but it sets us up to some land use conflicts, especially in those rural areas. It takes a lot of land to create a project that has a few megawatts, and with that, there's the temptation as the developer of one of these projects, you're to look at nice, flat, big, open, prime farmland. And that sets up the potential in a community for a conflict between your ag community and your solar power folks. The average landowner who leases out their farmland, they're getting a few dollars an acre a year, but you can be tens or hundreds of times more than that per acre for solar power use. And so, I think, we need to be talking as we go forward. What are the impacts community wide, and how do we balance that? Sue?
States nearby, anybody familiar with North Carolina and how they're dealing with solar farms? There are quite a few of them down in North Carolina. In Virginia, we're just starting to move in that direction. I'm familiar with a couple of projects. One that was recently approved, or I guess there were two that were recently approved by the Sussex County Board. It became pretty clear in that environment that part of what made it work, what made the numbers pencil, if you will, is how close those properties were to existing infrastructure that could pick up the electricity that was being produced, if you will, and move it on. But then there are other kinds of dynamics that will come into play for local planners and others. Putting in or installing solar panels is not simple. Requires pretty serious piling work that goes on to mount these solar panels on. And one estimate that I heard was that it could be a year in some of these larger installations where the neighbors nearby are going to be hearing, that bang, bang, bang as these supports are being driven into the ground. Short term for long-term gain, but it's the kind of thing that planners are going to be faced with as they're looking at these potentials as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of some of the stuff when Eldon and I were down doing an event with LUEP, we had heard from some of the rural jurisdictions, just some of the discussions they were having that I hadn't really been aware of up here in the more northern part of the state. And so I think that those lessons learned are really helpful for us in understanding the impact of noise and sound. There is some discussion about the overall loss of ag land. As Eldon mentioned, the value that comes with this far exceeds actual farming. And so what does that do to some of our food sources and things that we have done, and how do we handle it in a zoning classification, or questions that we're still trying to answer? I had looked at kind of both sides of the coin on this one, and we did get beat up pretty hard by the Sierra Club saying that these bills, these Wagner bills, and the one specifically that Eldon focused in on, SB 1393, that this was actually undermining some of the more progressive small solar companies. And that's why you see Direct Energy there. They've vowed to continue to move forward and work with us, But there is some discussion about, like Eldon said, this is a really complicated thing to get in place. And so was this bill put in as a way to actually deter it? So a lot remains to be seen, but I still think it's a good discussion. I still think we're getting there and there's a lot of opportunity, but we look again to have your feedback as we move into this newer area of regulation. The next one that we have here, like Eldon mentioned earlier, has the fail on it. This is House Bill 2272. And this bill's just been added because it was a bill I kind of thought was interesting and exciting and something that I would have liked to see happen. I use these bulbs, and a lot of times, you know, they have special ways that they have to be disposed of, and I don't have an IKEA near me, so it would be really nice if Home Depot or Walmart had a facility for these to be disposed of. But I think, Eldon, you kind of equated this to some of the things we see with the grocery store bag bills. And so if you want to talk a little bit about why you think this one failed.
And for those of you who've been around, a few more years, it would go back to even the bottle bill. There was a Senator Madison Marie from Montgomery County for probably the better part of a decade. Every year he introduced the bottle bill, which was would require retailers to take bottles back so we could help the environment. And of course, the retail industry fought that pretty hard. He never did get it passed. I don't even know if he ever got it out of committee. Then more recently, it's the plastic grocery bags, the same thing. The retail interests say, oh, this is too much burden on us. And that's what happened here. I think, that's just kind of Virginia. It's going to take something changing in the landscape for that attitude to change at the General Assembly.
Okay. Moving along, eminent domain. So these bills that are listed here are kind of a little bit back to the renewable energy bills. There are a lot of things here that deal with fees and cost and timing. So the first bill, SB 1153, this deals with the overall ability to reclaim some of the cost at the end of the lawsuit. So any kind of disagreement, what they were previously allowed to get damages for has now changed. 1421, this addresses the pavement of condemnation judgments. It changes the rate from what it was before. It was adjusted annually, and it was much smaller than the current 6%. So it's currently at 6%, and now it adjusts and can be changed. And so that's something, again, that you'll need to watch and pay attention to. And a lot of these are more applicable to your legal department and the things that they're addressing. But I think some of them start to kind of lead into questions about the direction we're going. And I think you had a couple of things you wanted to add on that, Eldon, but it starts to kind of set up potentially more lawsuits related to eminent domain.
No, actually, Brandie, I think you've covered it. A lot of these are just little changes, and we just got to keep an eye out on this stuff as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think for you in smaller jurisdictions, just making your town attorney aware of some of these things as you move forward, just the changing in dates and things that you might have previously had to prepare and when they were due, just make sure you're aware of these changes. But it kind of starts to set up our next discussion on eminent domain and what exactly is going on. And so this isn't a state bill this year that we were following, but it's an important Supreme Court ruling that took place that we wanted to make you aware of. It's Merv v. Wisconsin, and if you haven't heard about it, it's about the Merv family and the grandparents or elder Mervs had owned 2 parcels of land, and as it had been enjoyed by their family for years, when they passed on and it started to go to the heirs, there were 2 lots. And so the discussions became around what those 2 lots could be developed with and done. And so this gets into our favorite private property takings cases, back to the PIN cases. We see these all of the time. Every year there's something that's at least discussed at a state Supreme Court level. but this one specifically was of great interest. It deals with merger clauses and the overall value of the underlying parcels. And anytime there's ambiguity in the law, we will continue to see cases go forward to the Supreme Court. As we're always seeking something that gives us guidance and kind of answers this long-term question for us, we didn't get it here. Murphy, Wisconsin didn't answer any questions that are going to be clear definitives for us and local government as we move forward. But what it did do is, unlike the cases that had come in 2013 and 2015, this one we would consider as really a win for local government. It does really preserve our right to regulate and deal with these parcels as they're passed down. So it starts off by really saying, what is the overall value of the two parcels? And the same question that we always deal with, is it two parcels? Is it one? And so a way to think of it as a good example is if parcel lot E, that's yellow there on your screen, was all wetlands, and parcel B, lot F, was able to be developed with a house, is it a taking on lot E? And when the Elders owned it, they could have built a house there and retained lot E. And so the question became, as it passed down, was the ability to not build two houses a taking? And so I think I really feel for the family here. I understand why it is that they wanted to have one cabin and a separate house and for it to be divided up among their family. But as we see far too often, the question is the underlying value of the land and not the improvements. And so on these two parcels, they were looked at the overall value of the land doesn't change by having them divided up. So the court held with the local government that they were able to merge these parcels. There was no taking, and it was a win for us. So I think you can continue to look at this case and point to it as a great example in preserving our authority. But there's still quite a few unanswered questions. So take some time to read through that case. There's a lot of interesting points. Talk to your local attorneys. And I know specifically we have a couple of jurisdictions down in the Tidewater area that are looking at some of these parcels and their subdivisions and merging them and things that are going to happen. So this is a really important case for them that they followed this year. So I encourage you to take a closer look at it and be in the loop as we move forward. Moving on to our favorite subject always, which is proffers, and you will see a large fail sign here. And I think, Eldon, this speaks to your too much too soon argument. If you want to talk a little bit about what you saw with the proffer bills as the session started and where we ended.
One of the things you can count on pretty regularly at the Virginia General Assembly when there has been major debate on a policy shift that may have taken multiple sessions to work through, or even if it happens all in one session. And those debates were painful. Remember the proffer bill of 2016? Major policy shift. It was hard fought. Lots of energy went in from all sides, and policy shift occurred. And so here we come the next year with some attempts to try to address some of those, to try to maybe work out some of what some people see as problems, what local government sees as problems. And the attitude of the Assembly was, wait a minute, we just spent a tremendous amount of time in the last session. It's too soon. And we need to let the dust settle. I mean, you can hear that cliche. And that's where we are. There really aren't enough examples of the need to fix problems that these bills were trying to address, even though many of us intuitively know that those problems exist and they're going to raise their ugly heads. It's going to be another year, maybe a couple of years before the attitude shifts to make a change. There are some rumblings in the development community that they didn't really support these bills. It was the builders that supported the bill in 2016, and that they see, storm clouds brewing when they come forward to try to get some developments approved, and it's going to have a real impact on future supply of buildable lots. But I think that we're going to have to get to that point or closer to that point before there's enough of an attitude in the assembly to fix some of the problems that bills like these were meant to address.
So stay tuned, as Eldon likes to say. Stay tuned.
Okay, transportation. What you see in House Bill 2241 and SB 1331 really are getting at statewide transportation planning. These bills moved the planning work that's done at the VDOT and the DRPT level and moved it up into the Secretary's office, into the intermodal office. The idea for the proponents was that, okay, this gets it up at a higher level, it gets a broader look, and will be better for transportation planning. And there are other people who feel that this may re-interject more politics into the planning process because it's at a cabinet secretary or just below a cabinet secretary level. I think again, you took my words, Brandie. Stay tuned. The smart scale process is new, and there was legislation that was introduced to try to address some problems that some parts of the state feel exist with smart scale, but again, too soon. That whole change, which by and large is viewed as very, very positive, but you're starting to see some identification of some weaknesses, and most of what I hear from around the state is the leverage problem that exists for everybody outside of Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, because they have an extra tax source that they can use as leverage money, which gives them kind of a better scoring under smart scale. But having said that, that's the rumblings you're starting to hear, but the Assembly was not willing to go there. And whether those questions are going to be ones that will be raised in 18, or will it have to wait till 19? I'm not sure yet. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bill or two in 18. And as we go forward, I think the whole thing would be solved if there were just more money in the fund.
Yeah, I think that's a good point on these. Is kind of, it's a shift in the right direction, but we have a lot of things that we are waiting to see how they play out and how they're going to work for us. So again, we would welcome your feedback on these as we move forward. Moving into the next discussion, we were going to highlight a little bit about the discussion on fiscal stress and where this came from and what it means for us.
Yes, and there is budget language that creates a special joint subcommittee of the money committees from both chambers. That would be the Senate Finance Committee, which deals with both revenue and expenditures, the House Appropriations Committee, which deals with expenditures only, and the House Finance Committee, which deals with the revenue side in the House. Representatives of each have been appointed, and they'll begin meeting, I think it is on the 21st of August, to start looking at local fiscal stress. On the good side on this, Senator Hanger, who is a member of that, he's co-chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He's someone that really gets it on the local fiscal stress problem. He recognizes that we've got some issues, and we've got quite a few stress localities. On the House side, they've been more driven by the Petersburg problem, and how do we protect the state, and how do we protect the state's bond rating, and how do we make sure we know when there's a problem occurring as much ahead of time as possible. So the House has been more focused on that notice and what authority that the House has to deal with these issues. The Senate is a little more, yeah, they're very concerned about that, but it's like, okay, are there systemic problems that we need to address? And so the study is constructed to really look at both things.
Yeah. And I think this one I kind of always like to think of when something lands on the front page of the Washington Post, we're likely going to see some discussion in Richmond about it. So this was kind of an interesting one to follow. Sue, talking a little bit about FOIA and COIA, and there's a lot of bills on here, and I know there's some highlights that you want to give and important things that people should know about.
Sure do. And I'm going to start on the right side of that slide with COIA, which stands for Conflict of Interest Act. There really isn't anything in this list unless you happen to be a lobbyist or you're involved with soil and water conservation districts. And if you are, the two that you want to circle there are HB 1472 at the top and SB 965. I don't know, the fourth bill on the list. And go ahead and take a look at those. Let's focus more of our attention on FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And as you all know, FOIA is about providing the public and honestly the media with access to information about what's happening in the public sector. So let's run through these pretty quickly. SB 1040, this one clarifies kind of what's obvious, and I'm sure you all have followed anyway, clarifies that personal information that a citizen may give you in order to get information from you is not FOIAble. So if somebody asks to be on your list to get notices on what's going on with the Planning Commission and somebody else decides they want personal information about that individual, you are not required to provide it. HB 2178, that's a bill that got on our list by mistake. You can cross that one out. HB 2146, this one provides that there is now an online public comment form housed at the website for the FOIA Council at the state level. Every local government is required to put a link to that form on their own website, and it gives an opportunity for the public to make comments, to complain about what might have happened at your last meeting or what have you. The fourth bill on the list really is specific to the FOIA Council's membership, so we'll skip on down to the fifth one, HB 2143. This one speaks to the FOIA officers that each of your local governments have had to appoint. This requires that the state FOIA Council create a list that's on its website. So if somebody wants to look up who is your FOIA officer, they can find that. And it also provides for some online training courses and how often FOIA councils have to follow that. The next one is about libraries. It relates to what is, again, not FOIAble from libraries. Specifically, this relates to minors who have checked out books. And the seventh one on the list is specific to the Uniform Building Code. So those of you with interest there are going to look that one up. The two that are circled on the bottom are the big ones, are called the omnibus bills, HB 1539 and HB 1540. These are the result or the culmination of a 3-year study that's been underway by the FOIA Council on two specific areas. One relates to what's FOIAble within meetings, and the other relates to records, public records. And I can't remember which is which, but you'll find if you look at these that even after 3 years of work on it, the bills essentially are just cleanup. They reorganize the code as it has been constructed iteratively over the last few years. So it kind of puts things together that relate more clearly with each other. But what was kind of interesting within the 3 years of studies, lots of discussion about the balance between public bodies' obligations and the public's right to know, or the media's right to know. Of particular, I don't know, some people might find pretty interesting is there was a lot of talk about the kinds of technologies and social media that are used when public sector elected officials and so forth have discussions. For example, is texting FOIAble? Well, the answer is yes. And what came out of this was that language was improved so that it was not specific to the type of technology that's being used. It had been in the past, but rather some language was put in to try to anticipate what we haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah, so making FOIA interesting. It's always a challenge, but thank you, Sue. And I would just like to say that last year, my planning commission and town council had training on FOIA. We actually had the FOIA council in, or one of the representatives, and she gave us training. And surprisingly, it was one of the best trainings we've had, and my appointed and elected officials really enjoyed it. So I encourage you to reach out to them. That's free training, and they learn a lot about some of the things that they're doing that are a challenge to their staff. And I think it was very eye-opening and easier for them to hear it from someone else other than myself. So I encourage you to do that. But thank you for that recap, Sue. I know there's a lot there. As we round up this webinar, I know we're getting close to the end of our time and we have some questions that we want to get answered. But one of the other things that we'd like to make you aware of is as we go into 2018, there has been a wine kind of farm wine discussion that's kind of always brewing. And I am an expert in visiting these, but Eldon is trying to help me understand a lot of these regulations and these questions and discussions we're having. So there has been a planning committee formed. And what we are looking to do as part of APA Virginia is to gather some data from the different jurisdictions on how they are regulating wineries, some of the things that you are experiencing as challenges. So if you're a planning director, you've likely heard from myself through David Maloney asking a series of questions that we are assembling and pulling together for Eldon to have as we enter the 2018 session, so he can work with VACO and VML to kind of see what's going to come out of this study, what are the goals, and what's the direction that we would like to see them go. So stay tuned on that one as well, and we will go ahead and start to hear from you. What other bills did you follow? Is there anything that you felt we missed, or any bills you would like to look at us to recap or answer more questions on? And Sue, if you want to kick us off with some of the questions that are popping up, that would be helpful.
Sure, Brandie. The first one we got from John asked a question about Airbnb, and was the issue related to not paying taxes, or were there more land use issues that were being considered? And I would say that really most of the concern came from land use impacts, though certainly taxes was discussed significantly and certainly is of interest to local government. But a lot of focus was on the authority of local government in control of its own land use decisions as it relates to its comp plan, but again, issues of public safety and being able to know where these things are, and the responsibilities of local government to not only enforce conformance with its own ordinances, but also to protect the public was key in this.
Yeah, and I think this one was a little confusing to me at first, and Eldon tried to explain it to me and help me understand, but this is a little bit inside politics. So while we might have seen a lot of discussion around taxing authority and where the bill where it was discussed around budgets, back to Sue's point, I think for planners, don't worry too much about those details. This still is a land use discussion, and it's still important in that aspect. This was just a way and a place that it took the conversation, but it doesn't take away the fact that this continues to be a land use debate. The next question, Eldon, we have is about too much too soon, and that's in quotes. I think trying to understand as we talk about proffers, what do you think in 2018 is actually realistic is the question. What is the too much too soon, and when will we see something?
That's a great question, and I think it's going to take a failure, a significant project going forward and be voted down, and the reason it's voted down, and the developer saying the reason it's voted down is because his hands were tied and he had no way to help the local governing body get to yes, which is what conditional zoning was all about, and why it was put on the books over 30 years ago. And it may be until we have one of those, and I don't know that any of those are looming between. No, I don't think there are any looming between now and 2018. Now, that being said, I expect there will be bills introduced, and the issue will be brought up, and they will not get very far, but it will offer the opportunity for issues to be raised, especially with trying to do that with key members to educate them that we have a problem.
Yeah, I agree. So again, not to beat a dead horse, but stay tuned on that one. The next question we have comes on House Bill 1697 and the extension of the entitlements. Does that override local sunset clauses? And that was the first bill that we discussed at the beginning of the webinar. And unfortunately for you, the answer is yes. This specifically deals with what you might have in your zoning ordinance, dealing with sunsets and timeframes for submitting plans and the next phases. So what this does is kind of undermine some of that authority that you're used to having, and it does extend those beyond your sunset clauses in your zoning ordinance.
Let me take advantage of this, Brandie, to just explain a little bit about why it does. In Virginia, we're what's known as a Dillon rule state.
And a strict construction Dillon rule state.
Yeah, which goes right back to, there actually was a judge whose name was Dillon. That's why we're called Dillon rule, who made a ruling that gives state the authority to override or give permission to local governments before they do anything. Now in Virginia, the other thing that because we're separate city and county state, the last one in the nation to do so, we also have some differences in how these authorities are provided by the state to local governments. So for example, most cities are created by charters. If you look at legislation, you'll occasionally see in our top 10 list a charter bill for a particular city. There are some counties, but primarily they're cities. And this is where the details of what the state has authorized that city to be able to do are contained. Now for counties in our state, all those authorities are found in code.
General law.
Under general law. And if looking through our code, you'll see sometimes bills that are specific to an individual county or a small number of counties. They used to be described in terms of the population size, but now they're, of course, by name. Other sections of the code will say counties can do or counties cannot do. So that's the primary reason why Brandie's answer to you was so easy. The answer is yes. State law.
Yeah, that was free to everyone, that little added extra benefit from Sue on understanding why we're in the position we're in. So with that, I don't really see any other questions. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us on the webinar today, and thank Eldon and Sue for all the great work they do for the chapter, and encourage you to get involved in these issues. We have a lot going on around national politics and other opportunities there, but what happens in Richmond really does impact our daily life. And so hope you can join us for our legislative update calls and help us with some of those bill reviews. And again, just I know Sarah will wrap it up for us, but I really appreciate the Berkeley Group continuing to sponsor these efforts and being a big supporter of our chapter, so we can bring you these webinars when you're not able to be at our conference. Eldon, Sue, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I don't. Just thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yes, yeah, and thank you for all the hard work you guys do through the session. The chapter really appreciates it.
I guess it's Sarah's time to wrap up.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us next month, August 28th, for the Primer on Proffers webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.